Coming up on The World Today. Former U.S. President Donald Trump's election fraud trial in Georgia to be live-streamed. Plus, Gabon suspended from the African Union following coup d'etat in the country. And so other stories now, a leader of the far-right Proud Boys has been sentenced to 17 years in prison, one of the longest terms yet handed over to the U.S. Capitol riot. U.S. Army veteran 38-year-old Joe Briggs was an investigator of the storming of Congress on the 6th of January 2021. Prosecutors say the former informant, the correspondent, was convicted of a conspiracy and other charges in the month of May. In court, Mr. Briggs pleaded for leniency and expressed remorse for his actions. The sentence handed down by U.S. District Judge Timothy Kelly is below both federal sentencing guidelines and a 33 years sought by prosecutors. Another Proud Boys member, Zachary Rell, was sentenced on Thursday to 15 years, also on charges of seditious conspiracy. U.S. Attorney Norman Pattis, lawyer for both, called the conviction disappointing.
The results were harsh and we're disappointed. We felt that the government was in the position of an unscrupulous merchant. Imagine going and needing a new hammer and you've got your eye on a $10 model. So the government jacks the price up to $30, says we're going to give you half off and sell it to you for $15. Is it a discount that you spent $5 too much? The sentencing recommendations from the professionals in this case, the probation department, were in the 10-year range. We thought those sentences would have been high. 15 to 17 years is too much. I think there is a broader a crisis of legitimacy going on in this country right now. You look at the current presidential race. Where's Donald Trump in all of this? He stood on the ellipse, basically told people, 74 million of his followers, the election's stolen. Go to the Capitol. Fight like hell or you won't have a country anymore. Some people listened to him. Were they supposed to know that he was full of hot air? And was he full of hot air? I look forward to his trials. I look forward to seeing him testify someday.
Social service workers are cleaning up streets of Charleston in South Carolina after the city's levee was breached and parts of the city were flooded due to the arrival of Hurricane Idalia. According to local media reports, the streets were left underwater or clogged with falling trees and dangerous electric wires. As the hurricane moved north from Florida through Georgia and its South Carolina, Idalia was downgraded from a Category 3 to a tropical storm. Nearly 30,000 people across South Carolina were without electricity on Thursday morning after the hurricane made landfall. More than 100,000 Georgia residents and nearly 150,000 Florida residents were also without electricity.
We had a 9.23-foot tide. Now that 1.23 feet makes a big difference in the low country. It was about 14 or 15 inches. And that was just enough to completely cover some whole neighborhoods of our city, particularly on the peninsula, with water.
We had no significant incidents or injuries reported that were storm-related. Let this serve as a reminder that we may not always be this fortunate with storms, but preparation and communication remain critical to our public safety efforts.
Still in the United States, where a judge has ruled that former President Donald Trump's trial in Georgia over charges of election fraud will be live-streamed and televised. According to the judge, Scott McAfee, all the hearings will be available live on Fulton County Court's YouTube channel. Although a date for the trial has still not been set, there are speculations that it could be next year when Mr. Trump is running for re-election. The former U.S. president and 18 people have been charged with conspiracy to overturn the state's 2020 presidential election results. Mr. Trump, who faces 3 other criminal trials, has pleaded not guilty to the 13 charges he faces in Georgia. The VOA's chief national correspondent, Steve Herman, joins us now for more on this discussion. Hello, Steve. Thank you for joining us on The World Today.
My pleasure.
Now, what has been the reaction to this judge's ruling of live streaming in the Georgia case trial? We also know that President Donald Trump, or former President Trump's team, were really against that, right?
Yes, I can tell you that among the journalists and much of the general public, there is a positive reaction to this. And even though the Trump legal team did not really make strenuous objections to cameras in the courtroom, perhaps because, as you know, Donald Trump was a reality television star before he became president. And whatever you think of his politics, he is a master of that craft. So most certainly the former president will try to find a way to turn his Georgia trial into perhaps his highest rated ever reality show. And he will want his lawyers to play to the cameras.
And Mr. Trump still faces 3 other criminal charges. I mean, will we see the same thing happen for these cases?
No, the Georgia case, which is at the state level, will be the only one televised. The Florida case concerning retention of classified documents is a federal trial, and cameras are not usually permitted in federal courtrooms in the United States. The Washington, D.C. case about allegedly subverting the 2020 election is also a federal case, so no cameras there. And the other trial in the state of New York in the Supreme Court of Manhattan, which deals with falsification of business records before Trump was president, allegedly, the state of New York does not permit cameras in the courtroom.
There are speculations already on when this Georgia case trial will be set. What are you hearing?
Yeah, the prosecutor in Fulton County, Georgia, wants to try Trump and the 18 other defendants in that case together and quickly. This was the last case to be charged, and Trump already has, as you pointed out, a crowded legal calendar for the rest of this year in 2024. Some of the co-defendants will certainly file motions that will try to delay or will delay a quick start of the trial or trials in Georgia. Trump's attorney yesterday filed a motion there to sever the case from those a few co-defendants who have demanded a speedy trial.
But with all of Mr. Trump's legal woes, how could this impact his chances of winning the Republican ticket for the 2024 elections?
Well, so far, each set of indictments has only strengthened Trump's popularity among his base, and he is a distant frontrunner for a 3rd consecutive time for the Republican Party nomination over all the current challengers. And even though the court proceedings may challenge Trump's ability to physically campaign, at least for the primary election against the other Republicans, it's not likely to harm his chances. Now, the general election, when he will presumably have a rematch with Joe Biden, is a different story. Independent voters who previously supported Trump may decide his legal woes are not good for the country, or they're hesitant perhaps to support him again due to the 91 felony counts he faces for criminal acts allegedly committed before, during, and after his presidency.
All right. Thank you very much, VOA's chief national correspondent, Steve Herman. Thanks for your contribution on The World Today.
Sure.
Welcome back. African Union has suspended Gabon's participation in all of its activities following Wednesday's military takeover. This decision followed a meeting on Thursday of the bloc's Peace and Security Council after it had strongly condemned the coup. Earlier, the Gabonese junta said it will phase in what it has termed transitional institutions, and that's after the removal of President Ali Bongo. The soldiers gave no details on how long these will remain in place, nor how or whether power might be handed back to the civilian government. The main opposition alliance says the people of Gabon should be grateful they have dethroned the Bongo dynasty, but called on the military to act responsibly. Meanwhile, military officers have confiscated numerous suitcases and duffel bags of cash from various Gabonese officials' homes. Military leaders arrested several of Bongo's cabinet members early on Wednesday, on accusations ranging from embezzlement to narcotics trafficking.
Among those arrested, Ali Bongo's son, Noureddin Bongo Valentine, and former cabinet director Ian Ghislaine Ngulu, both of whom were present in footage of a raid on Ngulu's home broadcast by Gabon 24 on Thursday. Neither representatives of Valentine nor Ngulu could be reached for comment. In the meantime, residents of Gabon's capital, Libreville, have praised officers who ousted President Ali Bongo and installed a general as the head of state, while the country's opposition says it wants to work with the junta to find the best way forward for the country. The takeover ends the Bongo family dynasty's almost 6 decades in power and creates a new conundrum for a region hit with a wave of coups that Nigerian President Bola Tinubu has called a contagion of autocracy.
Nous ne pouvons demander aux Gabonais.
The African Union's Peace and Security Council met on Thursday to discuss the coup. Meanwhile, markets and trade have come to a halt at a Cameroonian town that borders Gabon, a day after the military officers ousted President Bongo in what's now the 8th coup in West and Central Africa since 2020. In a statement on Thursday, the junta said it had resumed domestic flights and restored some state institutions, but land and air borders remain shut. Residents in the border town of Amban fear the prolonged closures of borders could harm local markets, where Gabonese citizens make up a sizable portion of customers. It's not really different for truck and taxi drivers as well, whose vehicles have been stranded at Cameroon's border with Gabon after the military leaders closed the borders indefinitely. With their livelihoods threatened, drivers are complaining of being left without clean water or any idea of when the border might reopen. Joining the long list of governments that have condemned Gabon's coup, the Central Africa's political bloc, the Economic Community of Central African States, condemned the coup in a statement, saying it is planning an imminent meeting of heads of state to determine how to respond. However, it did not give a date for this.
Nigeria's president and ECOWAS chair, President Bola Tinubu, has suggested a 9-month transitional period for the Niger junta to return the country to civilian rule. He was speaking while hosting Islamic leaders who have been on 2 tours to Niger for talks with the junta. President Tinubu said that Niger would emulate the example of former Nigerian military ruler General Abdulsalami Abubakar, who returned the country to democratic rule in 1999 after a 9-month stint as a junta leader. The president, who is also the current chairman of the West African bloc ECOWAS, added that the Nigerian example had proved very successful, leading the country into a new era of democratic governance. The Niger junta had announced a 3-year transition period, which has been rejected by ECOWAS. President Tinubu warned that the ECOWAS will not lift sanctions imposed on Niger until the junta makes positive adjustments. Let's talk about update now from Thursday's fire in South Africa. Firefighters have gone back inside the Johannesburg building destroyed and to see if they still can find more bodies after the fire service said it wanted to be sure that no one had been left behind. The cause of the fire is still not known, but forensic investigators are also at that site, picking through the charred remains of burnt-out building. The K9 search team has also gone into the wreckage, which is less smoky and has cooled down since Thursday's fire. Relatives who believe that family members may have been among the victims of the fire have been asked to visit the mortuary or help identify the bodies. Officials are saying that out of 74 corpses, 62 have been burned beyond recognition, and they hope to use DNA samples to help identify the bodies.
People could not get out in here because there were burglar gates everywhere. in all the floors. There were backlight gates, so people could not run out. So they got trapped on those backlight gates and they actually got burnt inside. Some of them burnt because of the fire, others because of smoke inhalation, others because of heat.
And the search for bodies continues in the gutted five-story building in Johannesburg. One survivor spoke to losing his brother in that disaster. The area is still cordoned off as residents Wambali Kandua says he survived because the flames did not reach his first-floor apartment, but sadly, his younger brother had been killed in the fire. A sign at the entrance of the building block identifies it as a heritage building from South Africa's apartheid past, where black South Africans came to collect documents that would enable them work in white-owned areas in the city. Wits University professor Lauren Landau says the building, like many old buildings in the city, is a grim symbol of South Africa's dark past and its lack of transformation.
That building, perhaps more than most, all of Johannesburg still is shaped by the apartheid architecture, an architecture of fundamental economic, social, racial segregation. And that building is so symbolic in that sense as some building where they issued passes to non-white populations to come and work in the city. People who were necessary to the economy, but who the sort of powers that be didn't really want living amongst them. And we see this sort of transformation, and there's a sort of historical resonance because it's now was filled, at least it was filled yesterday, it seems, with people from outside the borders, many of whom cannot get passes, but who also are critical to how the city works, to how the country works, people that the country needs, but also who the dominant population, the powers that be, don't want in the country.
Burkina Faso's interim president, Ibrahim Traoré, has held talks with the Russian delegation on a possible military cooperation. The Burkina presidency said the visit, led by Russian Deputy Defense Minister, is a follow-up of talks between Traoré and the Russian President Vladimir Putin back in July at the Russia-Africa Summit in St. Petersburg. The talks also focused on aspects of military support, including the training of Burkina officers and cadets at all levels, including pilots in Russia. Burkina Faso's relations with Moscow have been in the spotlight since it kicked out French troops in the month of February, fueling speculations that it will deepen security ties with Russia like its neighbor Mali. The Russian government is offering economic and nuclear energy assistance to the country. Germany may be the country that invented the automobile, but recently the country is said to be falling behind in the sector. Back in June, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz visited Ford's new electric car plant in Cologne that is to produce electric vehicles exclusively, where he said his administration needed to support the transition to electric vehicles by convincing buyers that the infrastructure will be in place to support the electric vehicles. The global auto giant had invested $2 billion in that plant. However, earlier this year, the company announced cuts of 2,300 jobs in that area and 1,500 more elsewhere in Europe, citing the reduced complexity of electric cars compared to internal combustion engines. Series production of 2 electric models is due to start by the end of this year, while in the meantime, prototypes are being worked on. Lars Holter is a Deutsche Welle correspondent, joins me now from Berlin to talk more about this. Thank you, Lars, for joining us on The World Today. Let's talk about the latest numbers showing. What are they telling us?
Well, here's a number that surprised me this week, 1.3 billion euros. That is the profit BYD made in the first half of the year. BYD is the largest Chinese car maker, and until recently, Volkswagen was actually the most successful car company on the Chinese market, but it got passed last year when BYD took over the #1 spot for the Chinese market, and that is the largest car market in the world. German and other international commercial car makers have long realized that China is key to the future of the business. There's recent economic trends, of course, as wealth is up, more people are buying cars, there's lots of innovation. And yet, despite understanding how important China is as a market, many companies, among those many German companies, have failed to adapt to the trend. German car makers, for example, have long tried to stick with combustion engine cars, even though they haven't been selling anymore. And latest battery-powered models were essentially then the same old cars with a different power source. Now, German companies fail to see that Asian buyers are having different ideas about what a car should bring. It includes connectability, even built-in social media platforms and so on. So Chinese car makers have grown much more rapidly than the long dominant German or US players in that field.
But is there a chance that Germany is coming back strong?
It doesn't look like it right now, unfortunately. Just yesterday, we got more bad news from the German car market. It's about German car supplier Bosch. They are dropping out of the market for LiDAR sensors, just as another German supplier called ZF has done a few months ago. Now, LiDAR sensors are a pretty new thing. They are laser sensors that are generally seen as quintessential in the development of fully automated driving, as in really hands off the wheel and let the car do its own thing. LiDAR sensors are a little bit like radar that we know from mostly airport systems, of course, except they're not sending out radar beams, but laser beams, and those reflect on surfaces, and the signal shows the car its full surroundings. They're very reliable, very fast. They work in bad weather, even at night in the dark. However, these LiDAR sensors at this point are pretty expensive. They're not selling that well yet. So it's very disappointing to see Bosch and that other company ZF dropping out of developing the technology because they become so important. Both of these companies, by the way, have already gotten into battery development way too late. And now it seems there's another important future technology that won't be coming out of Germany. There is currently one French and one Japanese company in that space. There are a few American firms as well, but mostly it's Chinese companies there, including Huawei, that are currently very strong in LiDAR technology, and they are supplying the entire Chinese market, again, the most important car market in the world.
And talking about car markets, I mean, what are the biggest challenges these days?
Well, it's really basically safety, safety, safety. Looking at e-mobility, for example, car batteries need to be more safe. Just think of last month's Fremantle highway disaster, where a giant freight ship went up in flames in the North Sea. It was fully loaded with electric vehicles, and the batteries there couldn't just easily be extinguished. So that is definitely one important thing that has to be settled here. Also, of course, more safety when it comes to driving those new autonomous cars. Tesla is just facing 2 lawsuits this and next month in California and Florida, where the autonomous driving system has led to fatal accidents. Tesla, of course, saying it has nothing to do with it, as they insist drivers still have to keep their hands on the wheel. But that is generally not what people understand about autonomous driving. So there's a lot of challenges here around that as well. So basically, that's the main challenge: safety, safety, safety.
Welcome back. Thailand's king has reduced the 8-year prison sentence for former Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawatra to just 1 year. Mr. Thaksin, who returned home last month after 15 years of self-imposed exile, was immediately sent to jail. He was then moved to the luxury wing of the state hospital after complaining of heart problems. Mr. Thaksin had previously said the outstanding sentences over charges of corruption and abuse of power were politically motivated. Deposed by a military coup in 2006, Mr. Thaksin, one of Thailand's most influential and polarizing personalities, left the country 2 years later to avoid a prison sentence. Pope Francis has arrived in Mongolia, a predominantly Buddhist country with just 1,450 Catholics. The Vatican hopes his visit can act as a facilitator to improve difficult relations with China. Sitting in a wheelchair, Pope Francis was pushed past rows of Mongolian guardsmen wearing blue and red uniforms holding rifles after he left the plane. He exchanged handshakes with officials and Catholic leaders before entering a car and then being driven away. The 86-year-old pontiff arrived at the airport on the chartered Ata Airways plane, also carrying his entourage and accompanied reporters. The first event in the capital for Pope Francis is on Saturday, September the 2nd, when he will address government leaders and the diplomatic corps. Parents and teachers are angry with an order for more than 150 British schools to close some buildings which are deemed at risk of collapse. Authorities have marked the buildings unsafe due to the presence of reinforced autoclaved aerated concrete in them. This is coming on the eve of a new term, while schools hit by 6 months of teacher strike in this year are still recovering. And on top of that challenge posed by what schools are saying is a lack of funding in an inflationary environment. The impression with vital national infrastructure is crumbling adds to Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's challenge as he heads for a national election which is expected next year.
Don't worry, we've been working on this a lot in great detail. We will identify the schools, we will have the teams of people, we'll be making sure that we minimise this as much as possible, and the school will be in touch. It's 156 out of our 22,500 schools, so for most people you won't be affected, but for those, priority for me is your children's safety, and that's why we're taking these precautionary measures.
It's outrageous that ministers have known for 5 years now that a school collapsed affected by this kind of crumbly concrete. I've been raising for months the need for action, and it's high time that ministers publish the full list of schools affected and came clean to parents.
Shanghai residents are expressing very little interest in purchasing property despite a raft of measures rolled out by the Beijing government this week to revive their economy. The measures, which include lower mortgage rates for first-time home buyers, is expected to target the deepening crisis in China's massive debt-riddled property sector, which has been on the decline since 2021. However, analysts are warning that the sentiments among many Chinese is very weak for these moves to put a floor under the world's largest asset class, where roughly 70% of household wealth is invested. China is grappling with a slowdown that has rattled global markets, with the spotlight now firmly focused on troubled developer country guarding spiraling debt crisis in a sector that contributes to roughly 1/4 of the nation's economy.
Response to the policy easing is pretty crucial because I would expect there will be a stabilization for the property sales and hence stabilization for property price. But then if the sales continue to decline or do not have material impact from the policy easing, then we may continue to see the price decline here.
Well, culture means different things to different people and shouldn't be wiped away from history. Now, this is why Ethiopian traditional dancer Melaku Belay hopes to preserve the country's last cultural hub known as Fendika and save it from demolition.
This is Fendika, the last cultural hub of its kind in Ethiopia's capital, and it's just escaped demolition. The club was taken over more than a decade ago by dancer and choreographer Melaku Belay. His dream was to revive Ethiopian performance and visual arts in the heart of Addis Ababa.
This is a place where people enjoy art just like a concert. It is a house that is making a huge contribution to Ethiopia by preserving the culture. It has made an impact as well as by shedding a light on Ethiopian culture for the tourists.
But in June this year, the city authority in Addis said it planned to tear Fendika down to make way for a luxury hotel. It looked like the days were numbered for an institution frequented by locals and tourists alike, including Japanese expert Hiroko Samejima.
Actually, I love Ethiopian music and dance and other traditional things. But among all those traditional things, Fendika's atmosphere is the best for me.
Ballet and other supporters of Ethiopian dance and music got to work, campaigning to stop the demolition. Weeks later, after pressure from artists, journalists and locals, Ballet said the capital's mayor told him Fendika would not be touched. 20 years ago, Fendika was one of 17 such clubs in the capital. But the rest have since been lost, often to the city's development aspirations, which have not spared many historic buildings. And though Fendika has been saved this time, Ballet has been told that he will be required to develop the land.
And Indian micro artist Shashikant Parajati has made headlines by setting a new Guinness World Record for creating the world's smallest wooden spoon, measuring just 1.6 millimeters, and that's about 0.06 inches in Bangalore. Footage also shows that the winning creation, carved meticulously using a knife and a surgical blade from a single piece of wood, as well as other works made from various materials. Well, according to the Guinness World Records, Parajate beat the previous record of 2 mm, that's about 0.07 inches, which was set by another Indian artist, Navratan Prajapati, in 2022. The tiny spoon features a bowl and handle specified by Guinness World Records, which says that it must resemble a standard spoon. Prajapati had 10 attempts before getting it right. The artist holds 2 other titles from his micro artwork, and he plans to hold an exhibition showcasing his incredible creations.
When I went to my college, so there after college I getting bored, so then I thought what should I do. So then I started with chalk pieces. There is my ED classes, so I got some chalk pieces. Then I started carving with my compass, and then I got some 3D results. Then I thought I should do something better. So then after that I started with pencil lead. Then I goes to rice grains and also all miniature artists. I did like for only. Actually, I'm micro artist, so I'm looking for that some artwork. So I did a spoon work. Apart from that, I have worked around 600 plus on micro arts. So these are all some. Right now, I worked on very special. Chandrayaan 3 is very famous, so I worked on pencil graphite lead. That was also. I have 3 world records. 2 are from pencil chan and 1 for a smallest spoon. The world can know this. This is also kind of one art, so people can also follow this art. So that and my dream is to create one exhibition so that people can visit and saw this art.
And that's it on The World Today for this week. Thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful weekend. I'm Anne Nwawadu.